You're just a jealous underachiever, Dana. The words, slick with a venomous condescension I had somehow never noticed before, echoed in the sterile silence of the corner office. Vincent Coleman laughed, a short, sharp bark that was utterly devoid of humor. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, a throne from which he surveyed his kingdom of glass and steel, the sprawling city of Norfolk laid out like a map at his feet. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed a monotonous, soulless tune, casting harsh, unflattering shadows across his smug, handsome face, a face that had, until this very moment, always seemed confident and charming. Now it looked like a grotesque mask. "Who's going to believe you over me?" he sneered, the corner of his mouth twisting into a caricature of a smile. I stood there, frozen on the plush carpet of his office at Crimson Harbor Group, the very air seeming to crackle with hostility. My hand was clenched so tightly around the single sheet of paper I held that my knuckles were white. It was just a simple HR document, an innocuous verification form, but it had become the fulcrum upon which my entire professional life was about to pivot, violently and irrevocably. The weight of his dismissal, of the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of his words, felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. "My name is Dana Bell, and I'm 39 years old. For the past 7 years, I'd poured my heart, soul, and an obsessive amount of meticulous effort into my role as a senior financial analyst at Crimson Harbor Group, a mid-sized investment firm in Norfolk, Virginia, that prided itself on its integrity. I had always prided myself on my attention to detail. It wasn't just a skill. It was the core of my identity, the very thing that made me exceptional at my job. I was the one who could spot a misplaced decimal point in a 100-page quarterly report, the one who caught the subtle discrepancies in financial models that others, in their haste, had missed. My diligence was the silent guardian of our clients' portfolios, ensuring they remained pristine, profitable, and, above all, safe. But this particular detail, the one I'd uncovered on that fateful Tuesday morning, wasn't about numbers or market trends. It wasn't a clerical error or a rounding issue. It was about the man sitting across from me, the man who had just called me jealous and pathetic. Vincent had been my direct supervisor for 3 years, ever since his meteoric rise from junior associate to regional director. His ascent through the corporate ranks was the stuff of legend at Crimson Harbor. Everyone marveled at how quickly he'd climbed the ladder, how effortlessly he seemed to navigate the most complex financial strategies. His presentations to clients were masterpieces of confident charisma. His easy rapport with senior management was a thing of beauty. His apparent mastery of advanced financial theory, the way he could discuss esoteric portfolio models as if he were discussing the weather, painted a picture of someone destined for the very top of the financial world. And I'll admit, I had admired him too, at first. He was polished, articulate, and seemed to have an answer for everything. But over time, little cracks had begun to appear in his flawless facade. A fumbled answer to a technical question from a particularly sharp client, quickly covered with a charming joke. A tendency to defer to me or other junior analysts on complex calculations during internal meetings, framing it as delegation and team empowerment. These were small things, easily dismissed as the quirks of a big-picture thinker who didn't get bogged down in the nitty-gritty. I had attributed them to different educational backgrounds or professional experiences. I had worked my way up with a solid, if not prestigious, degree in finance and years of grinding it out, whereas he, with his supposed master's from a top-tier business school, operated on a different, more theoretical plane. The document in my hands, however, told a different story entirely. It was a simple HR verification form that had somehow ended up mixed in with my stack of quarterly performance reviews. It must have been a clerical mistake, a single sheet stuck to the back of my file. Most people would have glanced at it, seen it wasn't for them, and passed it on to the correct department. But my analytical mind, the mind that lived and breathed details, couldn't ignore what I was seeing. Vincent's master's degree, the very credential that had supposedly qualified him for his rapid promotions, was listed as coming from an institution called Westminster Business Institute. The name itself sounded legitimate enough, evoking images of old-world prestige and academic rigor. But something nagged at me. I'd spent my life in academia and finance, and I'd never heard of it. That evening, I took the form home. A simple Google search should have cleared it up. But it didn't. There was no Westminster Business Institute. Not in London, not in Boston, not anywhere. There were a Westminster College, a University of Westminster, but no such business institute. The deeper I dug, the more the gnawing suspicion in my gut grew into a cold, hard certainty. The next morning, armed with this unsettling lack of information, I approached him. "Vincent," I'd said cautiously, stepping into his office, "I think there might be an error in your personnel file. I was reviewing some paperwork, and this got mixed in." I held out the paper. "This school listed on your education background. I can't find any information about it online." His reaction had been immediate and telling. For a fleeting microsecond, a flash of pure, unadulterated panic flickered in his eyes. The color drained from his face, leaving his tan skin looking sallow and gray under the office lights. It was there and gone in an instant, replaced by a mask of cold fury. He snatched the document from my hand with unnecessary force, his fingers brushing mine like ice. "That's confidential information, Dana," he'd hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "You had no business looking at it." "It was mixed in with my files," I explained, my voice more steady than I felt. "I was just trying to help, in case there was a mistake that needed correcting." And that's when he'd launched into his tirade, his voice rising with each word, about jealousy and underachievement, making it painfully clear that questioning him, in any capacity, was a career-limiting move. The final, damning proof came less than an hour later, in the form of a summons to HR. The termination meeting was a blur of corporate speak and feigned regret, but one detail stood out with piercing clarity. The termination letter, which cited organizational restructuring, was dated 3 days ago. They had it ready. They were waiting for an excuse. As I stood there in his office, my career at Crimson Harbor in smoking ruins around me, the initial shock began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged anger. He thought he had won. He thought I was just another jealous subordinate he could swat away. But as I listened to his threats, watching the way his hands trembled ever so slightly as he clutched that incriminating piece of paper, I knew I had stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple clerical error. I had stumbled onto the truth, and Vincent had no idea who he was dealing with. The seeds of my suspicion had actually been planted months earlier, though I hadn't recognized them at the time. It started with the small things, the almost imperceptible inconsistencies in Vincent's knowledge. During client meetings, he would sometimes fumble with basic financial concepts, the kind of bread-and-butter theories that should have been second nature to someone with his supposed credentials. He was a master of deflection, though. When pressed for details about advanced portfolio theory or risk modeling, he'd flash a brilliant smile, deflect with a charming anecdote, and expertly redirect the conversation back to broader, less technical strokes. I had grown up in a family that valued education above all else. My parents, both teachers, my father taught mathematics at the local high school, and my mother worked as a librarian at Norfolk State University, had instilled in me a deep and abiding respect for genuine learning and hard work. They had sacrificed to put me through college, working extra jobs to ensure I could focus on my studies without the burden of overwhelming student debt. The idea that someone might fake their educational credentials felt like a personal affront to everything my family stood for. My relationship with Vincent had started professionally enough. When he first arrived at Crimson Harbor Group as a promising junior associate, I was assigned to help him transition into his role. He was charming, confident, and seemed remarkably knowledgeable about the industry. We worked well together on several projects, and I found myself genuinely enjoying our professional collaboration. He had a way of making even the most tedious financial analyses seem engaging, always ready with a joke or an encouraging word when deadlines loomed. But as time went on, and his promotions came faster and faster, I began to notice the cracks in his facade. During team meetings, he would often defer to my expertise on matters where he, as the regional director, should have taken the lead. When clients asked detailed questions about specific investment strategies, he would suddenly redirect them to me or other team members. At first, I thought he was being collaborative, sharing the spotlight. Now, I wondered if he simply didn't know the answers. The revelation about his credentials explained so much. His defensive reaction when anyone questioned his methods, his tendency to rely heavily on subordinates for technical expertise, his remarkable ability to avoid situations where his knowledge might be tested. I thought about all the times I had covered for him without even realizing it, all the presentations where I had provided the substance while he delivered the style, all the complex reports I had drafted that he had presented as his own. What troubled me most was the unfairness of it all. I had earned my bachelor's degree in finance through years of hard work and genuine study. I had built my career slowly, methodically, proving myself at each step. Vincent, meanwhile, had seemingly leapfrogged over more qualified candidates, including myself, through sheer deception. How many other deserving employees had been passed over for promotions because of his fraudulent credentials. As I left his office that day, clutching the predated termination letter, my mind was already working through the implications. This wasn't just about one man's dishonesty, it was about the integrity of our entire organization. If Vincent could fool HR and senior management with fake credentials, what did that say about our hiring processes? What did it say about the due diligence we claimed to perform for our clients? I had always been someone who followed the rules, who believed that hard work and honesty would eventually be rewarded. But Vincent's success, despite his deception, was forcing me to confront an uncomfortable truth about the corporate world. Sometimes the cheaters win. But not this time. The next morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring numbly into a cup of coffee, when my personal cell phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something compelled me to answer. "Dana Bell?" A calm, measured female voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "Dana, my name is Brenda Walsh. I'm the company's board secretary at Crimson Harbor Group. I hope you don't mind me calling you at home." My heart hammered against my ribs. The board secretary? No, not at all. I managed, my voice a little shaky. I heard about her departure from the company, and I wanted to reach out personally. Could we perhaps meet for coffee this afternoon? There are some things I'd like to discuss with you. The invitation was so unusual, so far outside of standard corporate protocol, that I accepted immediately. Brenda suggested a small, quiet cafe downtown, well away from the financial district where we might encounter other Crimson Harbor employees. When I arrived, I found her already seated in a corner booth, a folder resting on the table beside her. Her expression was more serious than I had ever seen it during the brief interactions we'd had at company-wide meetings. "Dana," she began without any preamble, "I need to be direct with you. Your termination yesterday raised some red flags with several board members. The timing, the stated reason, the lack of advance notice, none of it aligned with what we understood about the company's staffing plans." I chose my words carefully. I was told it was due to restructuring in the financial analysis department. Brenda's laugh was humorless and dry. There is no restructuring plan for the financial analysis department. In fact, the board just approved a budget increase for that division last month. Vincent Coleman requested additional resources, specifically citing the strong performance of his team. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Vincent lied about the reason for my termination, but he had actually been arguing for more resources for our department while simultaneously orchestrating my dismissal. The audacity of his deception was breathtaking. "There's something else," Brenda continued, lowering her voice. "You're not the first person to raise questions about Vincent's credentials. About 18 months ago, Jennifer Morrison in HR mentioned some inconsistencies she had noticed in his file. She was told by management that the matter had been resolved, but she never felt satisfied with the explanation she received. Jennifer Morrison. I remembered her well. She had been a thorough, detail-oriented HR analyst who had left the company rather suddenly for what was described as a better opportunity elsewhere. Now I wondered if her departure had been as voluntary as it had appeared. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my mind racing. Brenda paused, her eyes locking onto mine with a new intensity. Because the board takes its fiduciary responsibility very seriously. If there are questions about the qualifications of someone in Vincent's position, we need to investigate them properly. But we need more than just suspicions or secondhand concerns. The implication was clear. She was asking if I had evidence, not just doubts. I thought about the manila folder sitting in my home office, the comprehensive documentation I had assembled over the past 2 days. I had spent the entire night after my confrontation with Vincent diving deep into research, a furious, methodical quest for the truth that painted an increasingly damning picture of deception. What had started as simple curiosity about Vincent's credentials had evolved into something much more comprehensive. The Westminster Business Institute, the school listed on Vincent's master's degree, simply did not exist. Not as a defunct institution, not as a recently closed school, not even as a questionable diploma mill. It was a complete fabrication. I had searched through databases of accredited institutions, checked with state education departments, and even looked into international schools with similar names. There was absolutely no record of any legitimate educational institution called Westminster Business Institute ever operating anywhere. But the deeper I dug, the more sophisticated Vincent's deception appeared. The documents in his personnel file weren't just simple forgeries. They were elaborate constructions that had clearly required significant planning and resources. The letterhead looked professional, the signatures appeared authentic, and the formatting matched what you might expect from a legitimate institution. Someone had put considerable effort into creating these false credentials. Using my access to professional databases, I had traced Vincent's employment history more carefully than any HR department apparently had. His previous position had been with a small financial planning firm in Richmond that had closed down 2 years ago. Conveniently, this made verification of his performance and responsibilities nearly impossible. Before that, he had worked for an investment company in Charlotte, but when I called their main number, I discovered they had no record of anyone named Vincent Coleman ever being employed there. The pattern was becoming clear. Vincent had constructed an entire professional persona built on institutions that no longer existed or had never existed in the first place. Each lie had been carefully crafted to be difficult to verify, each deception designed to exploit the fact that most employers don't dig too deeply into references from companies that have closed or schools with similar names to legitimate institutions. What made his fraud even more audacious was the timeline. According to his resume, he had earned his master's degree while supposedly working full-time at the Charlotte investment firm. The degree was dated just 6 months before he applied for his position at Crimson Harbor Group. Even if Westminster Business Institute had been real, the timeline would have been suspicious. Completing a graduate degree in finance while maintaining a demanding full-time job would have been nearly impossible. I had printed out everything I had found. Screenshots of my searches showing no results for Westminster Business Institute, documentation of the closed companies he claimed to have worked for, and an analysis of the timeline inconsistencies in his resume. I also included copies of internal company documents that showed how heavily the firm had relied on his supposed expertise when making hiring decisions and promoting him over other candidates. The most damning evidence, however, came from cross-referencing Vincent's claimed graduation date with publicly available information about graduation ceremonies. I had found photos and news coverage of several legitimate business schools' graduation ceremonies from that same year. None of them showed any sign of a Westminster Business Institute ceremony, and none of the guest speakers or award recipients mentioned in his fake transcripts appeared at any real events. As I organized the evidence, I realized I had uncovered something that went beyond simple resume padding. Vincent hadn't just exaggerated his qualifications. He had created an entirely fictional educational background and used it to secure a position of significant responsibility at a financial services firm. Our clients trusted us with their life savings, their retirement funds, their children's college funds. They deserved to know that the people managing their money had earned their positions through legitimate qualifications. The question now was what to do with this information. Vincent had made it clear that challenging him would be career suicide, and his swift retaliation for my initial inquiry had proven that point. But sitting in my home office, Surrounded by evidence of his elaborate deception, I knew I couldn't simply walk away and let his fraud continue unchallenged. That evening, I sat in my home office, surrounded by the printouts, the photocopies, and the glowing screen of my laptop. What had started as a simple curiosity had now become a mission. I thought about Jennifer Morrison, the HR analyst who had been silenced. I thought about all the clients who trusted our firm with their financial futures. I said to Brenda, I may have some information that would be relevant to such an investigation. Brenda's eyes sharpened with interest. What kind of information? The kind that would need to be reviewed by people with the authority to act on it. We talked for another hour, with Brenda explaining the board's concerns about governance and oversight. She made it clear that they had been unaware of the questions surrounding Vincent's credentials and that my termination had been the first they had heard of any issues in his department. By the time we parted ways, we had agreed on a plan that would allow me to present my findings to the appropriate board members while protecting both of us from potential retaliation. That night, I composed the most important email of my professional life. The recipient list included all 5 members of Crimson Harbor Group's board of directors, along with the firm's general counsel and external auditing team. The subject line was simple but devastating: urgent, credentialing fraud and governance concerns. I kept the email itself brief and factual, letting the attached evidence speak for itself. I explained how I had discovered the discrepancies in Vincent's credentials, detailed my attempts to address the matter through proper channels, and documented the swift retaliation that had followed. Most importantly, I attached the comprehensive folder of evidence I had compiled, organized into clear categories that told a story of systematic deception. The evidence packet included screenshots of my searches showing that Westminster Business Institute had never existed, documentation proving that Vincent's previous employers had no record of his employment, an analysis of the timeline inconsistencies in his claimed educational history, and copies of the forged documents from his personnel file. I had also included a detailed comparison of his fake diploma with templates I had found online, showing how the formatting and language matched known diploma mill operations. But the most powerful piece of evidence was something I had discovered during my final day of research. Using LinkedIn and professional databases, I had tracked down 3 other individuals who claimed degrees from Westminster Business Institute. All 3 worked at financial services firms in different states. All 3 had suspicious employment histories similar to Vincent's. And all 3 had been hired within the past 5 years. This wasn't just about one man's deception. It appeared to be part of a larger, more insidious pattern of credential fraud in the financial services industry. I sent the email at 11:30 p.m. on a Wednesday night, knowing that it would be waiting in their inboxes when they arrived at work the next morning. I also sent copies to my personal email account and saved everything to a secure cloud storage service, just in case anyone tried to claim that the evidence had been fabricated or tampered with. The response was swifter than I had expected. By 8 a.m. Thursday morning, I received a call from James Patterson, the chairman of Crimson Harbor's board. His voice was tense but professional as he thanked me for bringing these concerns to their attention and asked if I would be available for an emergency board meeting that afternoon. "We take these allegations very seriously," he said. "The board will need to review all of this evidence carefully and determine the appropriate course of action. Would you be willing to present your findings in person?" I agreed immediately, though I insisted on having my own attorney present for the meeting. The stakes were too high, and Vincent's swift retaliation for my initial inquiry had taught me the importance of protecting myself legally. As I prepared for the board meeting, I reflected on how quickly everything had escalated. Just 3 days ago, I had been a satisfied employee with a stable career and a decent relationship with my supervisor. Now, I was preparing to present evidence of fraud to the board of directors, evidence that could potentially destroy Vincent's career and expose serious problems with the company's hiring and oversight processes. But I felt no regret about the path I had chosen. Vincent's deception wasn't a victimless crime. It had real implications for our clients, our colleagues, and the integrity of the financial services industry. His fake credentials had given him authority over millions of dollars in client assets and influence over investment decisions that affected real people's financial futures. The emergency board meeting convened in Crimson Harbor Group's main conference room at exactly 4 p.m. that Thursday afternoon, less than 48 hours after Vincent had fired me for asking uncomfortable questions about his background. I sat at the polished mahogany table with my attorney, facing 5 board members whose expressions ranged from concerned to incredulous. Vincent was not present. He had been asked to take a temporary leave of absence that morning while the board conducted their investigation. James Patterson, the board chairman, called the meeting to order with unusual formality. "We're here to review serious allegations regarding credential fraud and to determine the appropriate response. Dana, would you please walk us through your findings?" I began with the discovery of the misplaced HR document, explaining how my natural attention to detail had led me to question the legitimacy of Westminster Business Institute. Using a large monitor, I displayed my research results, showing screenshot after screenshot of searches that yielded no evidence of the school's existence. Board member Patricia Hendricks, a former federal prosecutor, leaned forward as I presented the timeline analysis. "You're saying he claimed to earn a master's degree while working full-time at a company that has no record of employing him?" "That's correct," I confirmed. "And the timeline inconsistencies suggest he fabricated not just his education, but significant portions of his employment history as well." The room fell silent as I revealed the most damning evidence: the 3 other individuals with degrees from the same non-existent institution, all working in financial services, all hired within the past 5 years. "The implications," I stated, "are staggering. This wasn't an isolated incident, but potentially part of a broader credential fraud scheme targeting the financial industry." When I finished my presentation, the board members exchanged meaningful glances. Patterson spoke first. "This is far more extensive than we initially understood. If these findings are accurate, we're looking at a complete fabrication of professional qualifications." The general counsel, who had been taking detailed notes throughout my presentation, cleared his throat. "We'll need to conduct a formal investigation, but based on this evidence, immediate action is warranted. We also need to consider our regulatory obligations. This kind of fraud could have serious implications with FINRA and other oversight bodies." The board's investigation moved with startling efficiency. Within a week, they had confirmed every aspect of my findings and uncovered additional evidence of Vincent's deception. The Human Resources Department conducted a comprehensive audit of his file, revealing that several reference letters had been forged and that background check procedures had been inadequately followed during his hiring process. More importantly, the board discovered that Vincent's fraudulent credentials had directly influenced several major client investment decisions. His supposed expertise in advanced portfolio theory had been cited in presentations to institutional clients, and his fake master's degree had been highlighted in marketing materials designed to attract high-net-worth individuals. The fallout was swift and comprehensive. Vincent was terminated for cause, with no severance package and no positive references. The board filed reports with relevant regulatory agencies, triggering industry-wide investigations into credential fraud. Several clients initiated civil lawsuits after learning that their investments had been managed by someone with falsified qualifications. But the board's response went beyond simply removing Vincent from his position. They offered me not just my old job back, but a promotion to Vincent's former role as regional director. They also implemented new policies requiring enhanced background checks and third-party verification of all educational credentials for employees in fiduciary positions. "Your diligence in uncovering this fraud protected our clients and our company's reputation," Patterson told me during our follow-up meeting. "We want to ensure that someone with your integrity and attention to detail is in a position to prevent similar problems in the future." The promotion came with a significant salary increase and expanded responsibilities. But more importantly, it validated my belief that honesty and careful work could ultimately triumph over deception and corruption. Vincent's attempt to silence me through retaliation had instead led to his own exposure and my professional advancement. I had transformed from victim to victor, and the company had emerged stronger and more ethical in the process. Looking back on my revenge journey, I realized that seeking justice had required patience, preparation, and an unwavering commitment to truth, qualities that would serve me well in my new leadership role and in all the challenges that lay ahead.